Hello, everyone. Welcome to CAGP Foundation's free webinar today. We're so glad you could be with us today. My name's Erin Kuhns. I'm the Manager, Education and Training at CAGP. I also want to extend my thanks to my colleague, Delaney Jackson, who is the mastermind behind our Zoom webinar today. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Paul Nazareth is VP Education and Development here at CAGP. And he's going to share some information and insights on what you all want to know about. Can we even talk about planned giving right now? I know Paul has a lot to share with you today, but just before I hand things over to him, I just have a few quick housekeeping items to mention. Paul will be delighted to take your questions. Please submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of your screen. He will take some time during the webinar to answer some questions, plus a few at the end. If you see a posted question in the Q&A that you would also like to be answered, you may upvote the question by clicking on the thumbs up symbol underneath the question. With such a large number of people in the webinar today, this can help minimize repeat questions and also ensure Paul has a chance to see them. I know you're all going to want a copy of Paul's presentation. Do not despair. Those who are registered for the live webinar will receive an email afterward with a link to the recording, as well as a link to the Dropbox folder, inside which you'll be able to find the PDF presentation, Paul's bio, and a CFRE tracker sheet. This webinar is worth 1 CFRE credit. If Paul is not able to get to your question today, he would love to hear from you afterward. You will find his email address on the PDF of his presentation, so please feel free to email him directly. One last thing, please join the conversation on Twitter and tweet about today's webinar using hashtag CAGP Education. Thank you, Paul. I will let you take it from here.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us as we're all adjusting to a new COVIDian existence. So today we're going to be talking about, can we even talk about planned giving right now? And as you may have seen from our description, I'll be sharing quite a number of different resources from planned giving experts across Canada and some global as well. A lot of what we do at CAGP is to convene, connect, and curate knowledge on planned giving, on major gifts and gift planning across Canada. So we have a lot of partners that we do that with. We have charitable partners like Community Foundations of Canada and the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And we exist to be the bridge between finance and philanthropy, working with advisors like CPA, Advocates, STEP, HALU, and others. So we hope today's webinar is going to be helpful. As Erin shared, you're going to get a copy of the presentation, but rest assured, when you hear me mention a lot of resources, reports, books, experts, we have organized all this for you in 5 pages of links for you not just to use yourself, but to share with your colleagues in your organization. You shouldn't try to do it alone. You need the partnership of finance, of fundraising, of marketing, your leadership, and of course, information as well for those who work in your organization in different capacities, like programs. So before I start, let's also get a feeling of who's in the room. Erin and Delaney, if you could launch our first poll, just to understand for me a bit better what kind of organizations are joining us today. Hopefully you see the poll here on what kind of program that you are trying to run. When we look at today's registrations, and we had to up our program, our number of registrations, because we've passed 500, which is wonderful. We're almost up to 600 right now. So we want to understand, one, who's with us today, and as well, who can we serve with some of these resources going forward. So thank you for answering the poll. We'll give it a little bit more time. Great. Hopefully there's enough folks who've answered it. Could we share the results of the poll? Oops. There we go. Great. So hopefully you can see these as well. It certainly looks like that the majority of people, almost 40%, have plan giving as part of their job description, although there's quite a bit I see who are starting a program or looking to run a reactive program. So this is great. I see some of the comments coming through here, the Q&A, questions about specifically advisors, and absolutely the presentation today also contains information for advisors and is available for Institute Advocates Points. My team will continue to answer questions as we go, and if there's any that are burning and will apply to the presentation, I'll stop and answer them, but I'll stop and just check in after each section. So broken down today specifically into 3 sections. Addressing the question, can we even do plan giving right now? Because there's so much packed into that question. And you know, we have over 20 plus faculty across Canada who teach with CAGP our courses and different programs. We draw in from their knowledge, but we have so many powerful colleagues in Canada who are legacy leaders in the global environment who do legacy and plan to giving. So we've tried to draw in information and insight from them, which I'll share in the crisis section. And then lastly, we know, and I'm sure one of your parents or your grandparents shared this with you, that this too will pass. As much as I will prime and share some of the trends before we went into all of this, we know that we will also come out of this. And we do have to strategize for what that next step, that continuity looks like. And I hope to leave you with some insight and resources today. So let's address the question. Can we even talk about plan giving right now? If you look in the National Geographic Channel in the Mesozoic era of caves, you will see this hyper annoying pyramid carved into the side of caves, and we've been talking about it forever. And I'm glad to say that if there's one thing maybe this crisis unhinged, it's this common thinking that giving is, as always, this continuum. Absolutely, the continuum is there, but we have created a whole new paradigm. We do have to understand where the sector was right before we began this crisis. And there aren't many other resources that are better in Canada than the collaboration between the Rita Hall Foundation and Imagine Canada's 30 Years of Giving report. We're so grateful to Imagine and Rito. If you follow them on digital and social media, LinkedIn and Twitter, you'll see they have been front and center in this crisis, speaking to the government when it comes to representing us in the needs of the sector, but also starting to listen to what's happening, what's going on currently, what are the real losses in terms of dollar and donation value, as well as staffing and how charities are adapting. But if you want to understand where we were so we understand where we're going, this is the key report to read. And again, as always, all of those reports will be in our resource section. One of them that we have to address, and actually when we come out of this and we look at the data, it will be exciting, because I do believe that we will see a change in this trend that we've had for now well over 2 decades, that although giving is going up, we just had the Canada Helps Giving report for 2020 released weeks ago that showed last year's level of giving, and that we had reached a new high in terms of total donations. Individual donations, individual donors are in free fall over the past number of years. What we are seeing in this crisis amongst charities that are on the front lines, and again, I'm still in touch with my old team at Canada Helps, we've seen an explosion in giving. You know, for us at CAGP, one of the insights that this report shared that was powerful was understanding why Canadians give. We had this data before in the wonderful report put together by Imagine Canada and the Moutard Foundation, but we got for the first time a breakdown of the demographics of why Canadians give. You may have heard me speak about this before. It is vitally important because as much as we are the people who care about tax benefits and the gift planning element of it all, shout out to our colleagues at AFP Government Relations, Jessica Roblowski and our colleague Julia Berry, who wrote that tax benefits won't save us, most recently in AFP's national blog. You bet. Number one reason why people give is compassion for those in need, and number two is personal belief in a cause. And yes, tax benefits are the last on the list, but notice that the oldest generation of donors cares about tax benefits more. And I share this now because it is so important to remember that as Canada ages, and we are already a country that is older than it is younger, if you remove immigration, Canada's age is second only, reproduction rate is second only to that of Japan, one of the oldest countries in the world. Older donors hold more of their wealth in assets, not cash. And as that generation ages, and really we have to think about what donations look like as we transition from the civic silent generation to the boomers, we're really going to have to understand what that means. Assets, not cash. That's a really big thing of what CG represents. However, and again, shout out to our wonderful colleagues at Hilborn for working with the Rideau Hall Foundation, pulling this out of the giving report and reminding us what giving has looked like in past recessions and economic downturns. You saw, if you're tracking, that giving to that crisis-minded charity, the food banks, the Red Crosses, the frontline funds, there has been a strong response. And of course, with special events canceled because of social distancing, we see online exploding. And we're going to get more of that data as we come out of this. Now, need will still be an issue. Remember, it was the Imagine Canada report Beyond Synergy that talked about how by 2026, the gap between what we raise and what is needed will be about $25 billion. What will that be after this crisis? Whole new ballgame. But we can rest assured that Imagine and great leaders are on this topic, but we'll have to be ready and thinking. From a plan giving perspective, we don't have many greater innovators than Dr. Russell James out of Texas Tech University. And for many of you on this call who are members of CAGP or have heard our education before, you know we often cite his work, and that his work talked about the mindset of a donor, and that it was disconnected from the traditional feeling of giving to the telling of a personal story, autobiography. And we're so grateful to Dr. James and our colleagues at Market Smart for putting that information online as you think about what wording to use. But again, that was the before time. One of the things that CAGP has also done, and you may have heard, we are about to launch the single largest normalization of charitable bequest campaigns in Canadian history this fall. And so before we did that, and this was based on the UK campaign, Remember a Charity, we partnered with colleagues in the data sector like Environics, did a national survey, and understood in every age cohort, in every province and demographic, what giving looks like to finally get a proper current picture. Now, we're actually going to be releasing this in a white paper in a matter of days to the sector, free so that our colleagues can understand where we are right now as we move forward with this campaign, and we will be doing this benchmark research every year. So look out for more of this information. You know, we can now confidently say that 5% of Canadians have wills. And yet when we think about the donors in our plan giving programs, well, then more older donors have wills. Look, this is what we will be focusing on this campaign. We know that we have done so much work with Leave a Legacy over the past 15 plus years, and that the awareness of charitable bequests, thanks to partners like STEP and estate planning councils across the country, is there. You've done the work as charities to talk to your donors. We have moved forward plan giving programs exponentially in the last 20 years, and more Canadians know they could do it, and more Canadians would do it. But we'll look at that gap from 62% to 5% who do it. This is where we need to be spending more of our time. Not in programs called Make a Will, not in regular estate planning seminars, not in making more estate planning booklets. The fact is that we need to make sure that we are connected in this way to moving donors from decision to action. That's what we're focusing on, and I will be sharing more about our campaign in a little bit. Our longtime colleague, Fraser Greene of Good Works, who wrote the seminal book in Canada on plan giving more than 15 years ago, released last year at our conference, his newest book, You Can't Take It With You. But he reminds us again When we look at the trend, and this is some incredible work by our colleague Penelope Burke in her work, that reminds us that when donors leave a planned gift, their annual giving, their major giving goes up, and in fact, undesignated giving becomes the trust that we have built through a lifetime of engagement. Now, Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is where this comes from, reminds us that as much as we had the pyramid and the vortex, in this crisis, absolutely, all bets have come off for many reasons. So I've got a couple notes here from questions as we move on to the next one. Thank you so much for folks for throwing those in there. You know, and we had some requests to review some of the different points on those slides from our information. I will review that when we talk more about our willpower campaign. So not to worry, I was just priming you with some of that data, and we'll share more of it as we go along. Again, a couple other questions about will we be addressing the relationship between charities and advisors, both in crisis and as we go forward? Absolutely, yes, we will. So great, thank you so much for the questions that you've logged in there. We'll keep going, and I'll make sure to answer those as we go along in each section. So now, in crisis, wonderfully enough, we had many of our expert legacy colleagues across the continent, across the world, reach out, connect with charities that they know, listen to that social dialogue and data that they have, and respond. So I'm going to share in this section a number of different expert opinions that have been shared that we consider at CAGP to indeed be vital and important to read as we think about where we are and what's next. I've cited before the expertise of Dr. Russell James, the work that he's done, and the work that he's shared. Another planned giving colleague, Michael Rosen from the United States, who actually won a North American AFP award for his work in planned giving, put out a wonderful paper called Legacy Fundraising, the Best and Worst of Times. And in this paper, they talked about and they walked through where is the mental mindset of planned giving and the words involved in it right now. You bet death is a sensitive subject. But wonderfully enough, they also identified as to why. And one of the whys, you may have heard this, that so many Canadians ran out to make wills. I'm going to frame that in a little bit. But so many people were doing that partially because this is the one thing in this crisis. In fact, this is one of the ways mentally, we got some great data and this paper outlines it, that this is the one element of death that people feel they can control. And one of the reasons why so many wills were written. Really grateful to Dr. James and Michael Rosen for outlining in this paper really a wonderful checklist after what words you use, what's the tone you use, and again, what is the activity that we must follow? And again, we have to remember, stewardship is all important. Relationships are all important in times like this. We saw that in the last economic downturn. The charities who knew that they would have to temper their major gift asks, they would have to reframe those asks, knew that if they doubled down on relationships, coming out of a crisis like this, they'll be first in line for those kind of gifts that donors are available to make. Another really important dialogue that was held across the country with our colleagues at GoodWorks, Fraser Green and Holly Wag, had a conversation with two advisors. Our colleagues Ryan Fraser and Brendan McEachran, two incredible experts who sit on our boards, our government relations committees, and teach for us. And this was a really unique discussion between head and heart. Anyone who's ever heard Fraser Green speak knows that there's a lot of heart there, whether you like it or not. He is that passion, he is that why, and he has dived deeply into this because of his background as well in different political and types of fundraising. His team is very data focused as well. In having this conversation with our colleague Ryan Fraser and Brendan McEachran, they came out with a phrase that is defined what we talk about for the past several weeks about this run on wills. We couldn't even get to quite a number of estate planning lawyers when we were doing a survey. We did a survey of estate planning lawyers to understand what was going on. And our colleague Brendan McEachran, who works for RBC and Insurance, defined the language, instead of saying panic wills, so that right now what's going on is people are creating reactive wills. They are reacting to this crisis. They are reacting to this emotion. And yes, this fear of death and this addressing of mortality. And when we spoke to estate planners, specifically estate lawyers doing these wills, they agreed that there will be a second wave after this of reflective wills and estate planning. Proper power of attorney and different long-term plans. And yes, in that phase, because in the reactive phase, charitable bequests were not on the table. They were doing it for speed. They were doing it to react. But in the reflective phase, we will have that opportunity. And if there's one thing you're ready for, we better be ready for that reflective phase, which the estate lawyers tell us will happen a few months after we come out of social isolation. We're going to give you, as part of this webinar, the one thing, and for especially those of you who are small charities, we're going to give you one free resource that's going to help you to be ready after all this for that next phase. Anybody who knows Gregory Warner and the work he does with Marcus Smart across North America knows he's truly one of North America's leaders in digital planned giving, in the intersection with email, with data, and that whole pipeline thought process of planned giving. And so it's a truly valuable piece that he shares. And he just did a webinar with us days ago on the process and pipeline of major legacy and planned gifts. And he reminds us that we need to have courage. We need to focus on mission. We have to take away our doubt about why we ask. Absolutely, we have to adapt how and when we ask. But you need to really get into understanding and deepen those relationships with your donors. Pick up the phone, engage. And for those of you in email marketing and direct mail, this is not necessarily the time to pull back. A really great set of resources. Grateful to Greg and Market Smart for making several blog posts free and available. We're sharing those resources and the webinar with you after this. For any of you who know the colleagues at PG Growth, Canada's largest planned giving consulting team, who includes people like Ken Ramsey, one of the founders of CAGP, they also hosted a discussion very recently about strategic philanthropy in uncertain times. That whole intersection between planned major giving language, and it is Ed Sluga who coined the phrase, in 2020, every major gift is a planned gift. This morning I spoke with a top 10 large Canadian charity who was concerned about the current stall of securities. But it's also because in the past couple of years, securities have not just been standalone major gifts. They have been paying for campaign pledges. They have been fulfilling different types of pledge commitments. They have been starting endowment funds. They've even gone all the way down in size, but increased in volume to annual funds. We have got to be ready to understand how donors are giving. We have to go deeper into the why of donors are giving. Again, our gratitude to PG Growth for making that webinar free and available, and we've given you that link to that discussion. But we need to highlight the book by Ken Ramsey, which is one of the only resources out there that actually is an entire discussion about how do you talk to a donor? What do you say? How do you listen? How to react? The empowerment dialogue is one of the great resources to understand how to go forward and understand and talk to donors. So a couple more experts that I want to mention because they've been very generous in sharing across the country with their clients, with CAGP, their thoughts and their observations in this crisis. For those of you who know our colleague David Kravenchuk, who we co-host the Western Canada Fundraising Conference. We do a lot of collaboration with CAGP. We had a delightful argument just before all this started in February in Edmonton. Head versus heart. And if you were there, you'll know it took a slightly Mexican luchador vibe. That wasn't intentional per se, but it was a great discussion on reminding ourselves that as much as CAGP may teach the vehicles, the tax benefits, the understanding, a lot of that is for your administrative team, for your finance office, for your leadership to understand the potential and the processing issues. But for those of you who do the marketing, who have the conversations, who work with the donors, donors decide with this. This is about how much, when, how to give, but this is why to give, and that is the decision maker. That is the third base coach. And David, in his talk he was going to give at our conference, really on the connection between empathy and legacy, reminds us not to disconnect those two things. So those of you writing appeals, and we're going to talk about that in a second about legacy marketing. A couple of Canada's experts in marketing and design, John Lepp and Harvey McKinnon. Harvey, who's just released a brand new book connected to monthly giving, but reminding us that monthly givers are the highest value leads of planned giving. And our Harvey reminds us as well that relationship with donors and that design and process matters. That a lot of people right now have said, could we do planned giving? Should we stop having the discussion? Should we stop all fundraising? And those experts who have decades of experience, who work with charities large and small, say you cannot stop. And if you do, then maybe you are disconnected with your mission. We are always respectful of donors and the situations out there. But many donors are relying on you right now. Many Canadians are relying on you right now. And we have to reconnect to that mission. Mission is part of process. So monthly giving, direct mail, all of that lead generation needs to continue. Now, lead generation would be nothing without design. Now, we've shared this podcast with John Lepp and Charity Village, partly because it's the podcast with John Lepp with the least amount of swearing. And I love John because there may be no other people as passionate as he and his team at Agents of Good are about design and the whole concept of where legacy meets head and heart. Process, but passion. Please, it's a good listen on design, and he includes some content in there on legacy and legacy marketing. As we move forward, just that reminder too, we have to start flipping the script when it comes to talking to donors about this. And right now in those stewardship discussions, in those why do you support us discussions, and in the check-ins, we had a lot of requests from our colleagues to say, what do I even say during the check-ins everybody's telling me that we want to have with donors? This is a power question. Jen Love, who is a national educator on legacy as well, has a wonderful series of power questions for discussions with donors that we'll share in a link. We were very grateful to Jen and Amy Lindenberger, who's a legacy marketer out of BC, also one of the chairs of our CAGP chapters, held a very in-depth webinar on legacy marketing, breaking down the structure and strategy. And yes, it was held right at the start of COVID, so they answered quite a bit of questions about tone at this time. But again, we're not backing off of direct mail, of, in this case, one of the strongest methods of plan giving prospecting, surveys. Again, our colleague in the United Kingdom, the great expert Richard Radcliffe, really believes in focus grouping and connecting with donors and listening to donors. Amy articulated in the blog post that we've shared with you, but also in that webinar, the concept of why survey. And again, in my work as now lead faculty with CAGP, we pull in a lot of plan giving material from charities across the country, and we see some brutal surveys that are too long and too technical. They live up here for the marketing department instead of living here. Amy describes a great survey as a guided meditation on personal legacy and your connection to the organization. We heard from people after that webinar that said, that concept and even her description moved them. Are you creating that kind of connection with your donors before or even now at this time? Going along some of the resources that we've shared, especially in the COVID season, I'm just checking the chat and questions here, excellent, is the great podcast and blog out of our colleagues in Alberta, Vitriol Group. Their podcast is one of the most dynamic, one of the most topical, and they're pulling experts all the time to have the right conversation at the right time. So we were incredibly grateful that they pulled together some experts from across North America, leaders with AFP and CGP and colleagues, to have this discussion on fundraising in the time of COVID. If you want your bosses and boards and people that are telling you slow down on fundraising to get on side and they won't read papers and studies and reports, this podcast, it's what's going to remind them you are more important now more than ever. As Guy Malabone likes to say, and Guy, I saw what you did on LinkedIn there, who admonished me for some of our response, but he is darn right that money drives mission. And of course, if you know Guy's Twitter handle, which is Ask Muscle, he also reminds us that we've got to have courage. Money drives mission, but mission is all important. We are needed now more than ever. It's not just food banks or the Red Cross. If you believe in what your organization does, we need to re-strategize on the appropriateness and tone and get out there to market. I sit on the board of the Carleton Masters of Nonprofit Leadership with Guy. We had a great conversation as a group between what's the response and different partners across the country. Got to remember, fundraising needs to not stop, especially now when organizations are talking about laying off staff, et cetera. We need to make sure our organizations are financially strong. Kathy Arney, who is one of Canada's most senior fundraisers, who actually has a background in finance, is one of the stalwarts at CPA Canada. When you look at the connection between fundraising, philanthropy, and finance, reminds us about a lot of lessons. She has this great session that I had just seen at CPA Canada's last national gathering about lessons from the last recession and downturn. For many of you who are observing, I don't know how many leadership level, management or executive level people are on this call, but there was a lot of pushback from staff and boards and teams before this to digital adaptation, to innovation. For many of you who are in fundraising, you know how much you wanted to focus on stewardship, but didn't have that organizational support. And now that they hear all the experts supporting stewardship, they're doubling down. And of course, right now, we've seen in every COVID response fund out there that donors are all of a sudden overcoming designation more than ever and connecting to an organization's core mission. Ask a food bank about that. So some great learning there, and again, giving you connection to these articles and resources. As we move forward from crisis to continuity, I can't not mention the foundation world of donor advised funds, both commercial and financial and community donor advised funds. This is the #1 trend in North America. There was a lot of discussion on this. And again, I've given you a link to the 2 strong discussions we'll talk about in continuity. But we've seen over the past number of weeks a strong response, primarily one from a group called Give5, a collaboration of community foundations, donor advised funds, and granting foundations. If you haven't heard of this movement, you want to check out Give5. If you're a charity, you want to check it out because they are there saying we've got to activate more capital in foundations right now. Now's the time. Great link we're giving you to our colleague, Joanne Ryan on Business News Network, talking about how donor advised funds are talking to their clients to say, now's the time to give. Now's the time to grant. We look at collaborations like this in Waterloo region between the Community Foundation, the United Way, Social Innovation Partners. We're really innovating and it's happening. Things that people had said, it'll take a natural disaster for us to collaborate on this stuff. Well, it's happened. And actually, in respect for all the challenges and all the tough loss of life, people are taking this seriously and actually breaking the mold and doing things and taking action. We've got to give credit to these organizations. We want to give you the link to it because you want to keep up on it from an organizational, institutional perspective, because it's not just about fundraising. Speaking about not just typical fundraising, but granting and public understanding of giving, yesterday was Giving Tuesday now. Yes, you can do all the groaning you want. I can't hear you, which is great. As you know, I was on the Canada Helps team that helped found Giving Tuesday in Canada. Giving Tuesday, the day officially where all fundraising experts get on Twitter and moan and groan about all the asks. Yes, it can get unstrategic. But if you were paying attention yesterday, you would have seen that Giving Tuesday now gave more organizations permission to talk about giving, to thank their donors, to steward, to ask in a smart and heartfelt way. I saw a lot of people who wouldn't give Giving Tuesday the time of day were online yesterday. Not just charities, but corporations, companies, foundations, full paid ads like this in the Globe and Mail. But recognize as well that corporations are hurting and have to refigure out their CSR after this. And many charities are decimated. Before this, we saw how hard it was, for churches to go forward in the next decade. No more passing of the basket. We had our faith-based colleagues going into Easter and Ramadan without the ability to connect with their donors. Everybody got online, but are they doing it strategically, or are they just trying to make a digital basket or digital connection? That's the strategy. Now, of course, before this, in the world of special events, golf and galas ruled. That's a picture of a gala, right? Okay, let's just pretend it's a picture of a gala, because we all know what you were doing a week and a half ago. But make no mistake, as we try to digitize what that means, it does not mean putting it on Zoom. The strategy has changed. And for plan giving as well, our engagement will change. If you haven't been tracking the growth in gaming as fundraising, several hospital foundations in January and February, before any of this hit, hired new directors of gaming fundraising. And the largest fundraiser that's gone online, and an example of a case study we'll give you, is the Princess Margaret Ride to Conquer Cancer, digitally recreated from the ground up. We're going to have to understand what that means as well in the plan giving ecosystem, which I will address in resources. Now, I want to make sure as well that we have an understanding of the last piece. How do we go and where do we go from here? I want to address a couple of questions that have come through here. Great ask and reminder from one of our colleagues, and we've given you that link after, that our colleague Margaret Mason and Norton Rose Fulbright, we have also shared as CAGP. There indeed has been a wonderful result in the BC insurance situation. We've shared that link, and we will be sharing more as it goes along. Please remember today, the first link in our resources is to subscribe to CAGP's e-news so that you can get updates after the federal budget, after any tax changes, and on this kind of strategy as we move forward. And we're grateful to our colleagues, Norton Rose Fulbright, for always being with us on that. Just going to double check if there's any more questions here. Great. Perfect. Great. Some questions on different types of legacy strategy. And one request that it cut out there when I shared the Western Canada expert colleagues, that is the Vitrio Group and their podcast Brain Trust. But again, not to worry, all of these links are in the resources and we've separated them by articles, podcast, finance, marketing, etc. Not to worry. Last piece here that we've got is continuity. Great, I'm good for time. I want to make sure there's time for questions, and I can see some more coming in. Thank you. So again, where do we go from here on the continuity side when we're coming out of this, when we understand the data from it, and what are the next steps? Now look, anybody who's heard me for the last 6 months in my work across the country for CAGP will know I've been talking about these two books, and I'll keep on like a broken record because it is a very important contextual conversation about what philanthropy was meaning before all of this. A lot of people are saying, why are we rebuilding what was broken? Why can't we rebuild a better world? Well, if you want to see a perfect construction of a broken world, Anand Giridhara's best-selling book, global best-selling book, front cover of Time, Maclean's, Walrus, everything, every news source, Agenda with Steve Paikin, everything, CBC, National, 60 Minutes. He was reframing the world of philanthropy in billion-dollar donors who don't care about doing good. But anybody else who is connected maybe to the community foundation movement or who's looking at a future in more organic and more friendly philanthropy would be following Edgar Villanueva's Decolonizing Wealth. A leading movement that many of us were introduced to thanks to community foundations, but he has helped define a new narrative, working in charity and foundations himself, and how we can break that cycle of philanthropy that is up there and not accessible to doing good that is on the ground. And we're gonna have to be ready for whatever that means, but we will live in this new place. You choose which pill, red or blue. But these are two great resources that you wanna read coming out of this. Another couple of great resources that are important and absolutely apply to the charitable sector is Trust by David Johnson, the former Governor General. If anybody saw, he wrote a wonderful op-ed in the Globe and Mail yesterday on Giving Tuesday now about how we as Canadians need to connect, need to not just be in this together, but actually do something together, to act together. In his book, Trust, and remember, he's been the CEO of a number of different charities, has led the Rideau Hall Foundation to be its strongest activator in philanthropy. We're really proud to partner with them, but it's a great roadmap on how you as a charity and fundraiser can build trust with donors and specifically Canadians. Because I believe as well, we have too much American resources out there that don't take into context our culture and our situation. And lastly, New Power, written by one of the co-founders of Giving Tuesday. And we share that because indeed, when we look at social media, when we look at the sharing, when we look at the language of digital in which we all live in now, when people ask me where I live in Zoom, inside this box. Well, in new power, in digital, and in a story-driven world, we're going to have to understand how to speak outside of command and control, and this book really articulates that quite well. It's all about piece of the pie. You know, one of the more interesting things, and I don't know how many people may follow charity law expert Mark Bloomberg, one of the few people who's more obsessed than me and others on charity data, who really digs down into the Canada Revenue Agency T3010 data. One of the things he shared at the beginning of 2020 was that for the first time in a decade plus, the number of charities contracted. We have begun already before this crisis. Charities going out of business, not being sustainable, not being strategic. We saw the mergers and the connections and acquisitions before this crisis. When we come out of it, you know and I know it will be a new charitable landscape. So we've got to pay attention to the data. We've given you the link to Mark and other law firms on the charity law side and the charity data side that are experts at understanding the operational piece. We've got to dig down. We've got to go local. And great thanks to the Philanthropist. If anybody's following the Philanthropist weekly charity roundups of media, a wonderful description every week of all the different media hits in the charitable sector, and the community foundations working together on a new understanding of rural Canadian philanthropy. That's coming in the next little bit, and they've got some great resources. We've given you a link to it. Remember, disruption didn't stop because of a crisis. In fact, I don't know how many of you there in fundraising and charity have tracked all of those non-charity donation campaigns. Just Monday morning, CBC's National News shared a wonderful initiative for social good to support frontline workers for meals and restaurants to bolster the economy, but they used the word charity, and it's not a charity. Those weren't donations. The wonderful program called Meals TO openly puts out there, we're using GoFundMe, we're trying to do social good, and they consulted the right players, charity law experts, community foundations, and other partners to say, how could we move quickly? How could we engage all these moving parts? And the answer was no. So we're also going to have to unpack social good as we do case studies to see what happened in the crisis. And as we move forward, I personally believe that there'll be more that we're going to be doing together. When it comes to trends coming out of this, you've seen, and I've shared the Give 5 movement. Make no mistake, donor advised funds in community foundations, sponsored financial or advised foundations, and public granting foundations will be a really big way. Your charity also gets to support as more donors move into this space from the traditional private or family foundation. We need to be ready. And this will be a new arm of major and planned giving, again, what we call gift planning. There is no separation anymore. On this call, we saw who registered. It's part of your job, but not all of your job. CAGP sees that we have never had more people doing planned giving less of the time, because it's all blended together in major and planned gifts, donor advised funds at the center of that. We've given you some resources on this, and we're grateful to our colleagues at Strategic Insight who've done Canada's first study in donor advised funds, their capital, their growth in the past number of years. We've negotiated a deep discount into that corporate report. We've given you a link to it as part of this, and are grateful to Strategic Insight for giving us that information so we could integrate it into our courses in our data. But if you read this report, you will see foundations and capital is growing. Donors are seeing the opportunity, and yes, advisors are getting up to speed on the philanthropic product and profit of philanthropy. We as a sector need to be ready to engage that, because all of them are public foundations who grant. They are amassing money that must go to qualified donees to do good work. That's you. And so it's really important that we engage and understand what's the strategy of it. An important trend that was really active before that will only be growing as we come out of this is women, wealth, and philanthropy. Any one of you who's been observing the sector has seen more large charities started women's giving circles, understanding and learning journeys around female philanthropy. We want to continue that. If you haven't read the TD Women and Wealth Report or the RBC New Face of Canadian Legacy, that does a great job of outlining family values and giving, millennials' money and giving, and Women in Wealth, one of the strongest public data reports, and the StatsCan data managed by the Economist Business Unit. You know, one of the requests that we get as part of our courses, one of the challenges CAGP faces, and the criticism of a lot of our marketing colleagues, is that we spend too much time up here. Again, it is the responsibility, and that's why we work with CPA for finance to understand processing, how, what, when. But it is your job, dear fundraisers, to go deep in the why. The donor's why, maybe your own why. And there's not a huge amount of resources that have been guiding that. Here's a couple of recently published books that do a great job of that. Lindsay Green, a Canadian best-selling author in the world of personal finance, wrote this book about legacy, included AFP and CAGP in it, did a great job, but it's a storytelling book from a Canadian finance perspective that your mom could actually read and enjoy on creating a life of purpose. Our colleague Ryan Fraser, who is faculty with the Gift Planning Association, who is a multi-decade-long advisor himself, wrote a book and a collection of stories of personal finance and purpose and where it intersects with legacy. Great resource. We're going to give you a link to a couple of these. But when people ask us about what charities are doing, and when we call our members, when we talk to our members to say, what are you doing? We have a really powerful service as part of CAGP membership called Ask an Advisor. And it's a free service where you can ask an advisor about different tax benefit giving. But when we listen to them to say, why are you asking? Why are donors asking these questions to you? What are you doing in this crisis? The strategic organizations are the ones who are doubling down on stewardship. This wonderful visual shared by our colleague Alexis Gateman in Montreal, a wonderful plan giving strategist, reminds us that stewardship, and again, this comes also out of the data of Penelope Burke, Cygnus Research, a wonderful American study. We are trying to partner with Cygnus to do a Canadian study. We need you as charities to partner with CAGP on that to understand. So we can also prove, as we see in America, that when a donor makes a planned gift, the major giving goes up, the annual giving goes up, and stewardship is the ongoing conversation that will not just confirm the bequest, but grow the major gift, evolve the bequest into life insurance, evolve that pledge into an in-life payment. It is the evolution, railroad tracks on which the donor goes. As I finish up, a couple of reminders, and we had a lot of questions early on about advisors and working with professional advisors. That is the reason for being in CAGP, one of our key pillars, and that we educate charities, we engage advisors who are a key and important bridge between finance, fundraising, and philanthropy. And we do that with CPA and finance advocates in planning, our colleagues with STEP, Family Enterprise Insurance, all of it. We are co-creating education. So for those of you, and we're really glad several advisors have joined us on this call, we are creating CPD credited courses in education. We have a lot of opportunities, and I'm going to share the single most important one with you in a minute. But again, we exist to be that bridge between the donor, your client's purpose, the planning that needs to take place, and the product that you as an advisor represent, and are only licensed to sell. We in charity are not. So for those of you that haven't seen it, we're very grateful to our funding partners who helped us create this walkthrough, this conversation for advisors in the philanthropic conversation. Free, it's online, we're giving you a link to it. In fact, those of you that are following us on Twitter will see that we're tweeting at #CAGP education as I'm speaking. All these resources putting out there, and they're all in our resource section. But advisors, this is the quick one to read before a client meeting. If you see they've got charitable intent, and again, we know this is a niche conversation. When you bring it up, and again, we're prompting, are you interested in philanthropy? I see your name on a donor wall. You were key funder of that gala. This is the roadmap for you to have those conversations. Now, when we made the roadmap, we found a key understanding that we had to go deeper on. And that was that when we asked advisors, are you talking to clients about philanthropy? Overwhelmingly, they said yes. But when we asked Canadians, are your advisors engaging you? Overwhelmingly, they said no. And so we said, what are we going to do about it? We went back, we partnered with Community and Private Foundations of Canada to actually work this report to understand how advisors can integrate philanthropy into their business. Yes, into their ecosystem of profit, not just philanthropy. This is what partnership looks like. We are moving forward with this in a very strong way in the past 2 years, because we understand that if it's not the edge you have, it'll be the wedge another advisor uses to take that next generation of clients away from you. What have we done? In 2018, we partnered with Aspire Philanthropy and our colleagues at the Knowledge Bureau, who are national experts at advising. We're working with advisors on education. CPD accredited, IROC accredited, Institute accredited education, Canada's first designation for advisors in philanthropy. Now, I highlight this today at the top of our link to use as advisors only, also because we're about to do a big marketing campaign, because this right now is Canada's most robust, highest CPD accredited education in fundraising, in finance and philanthropy in the country. The Knowledge Bureau has a very robust online system to do all the education and accreditation, and there's a discount one for CAGP members, and the price is going up in the middle of June. So we'll give you a link to that. For those of you in the charity world, you know, we continue a lot of these narrative conversations. But for us in CAGP, we are on the cusp of one of the largest evolutions of our third pillar: educate charities, engage advisors, engage the public. Many of you have known Leave a Legacy for years. It is a grassroots, community-driven program with our chapters and charities across Canada, and in 2020, it is evolving to Willpower. Willpower is our new national bequest campaign, the largest social normalization of bequest campaign, top-down digital marketing media in Canadian history. It's starting in September. It's piloting in Hamilton, Ontario, and the Golden Horseshoe, Niagara. And in 2021, we'll start rolling out to the rest of Canada. We've got a link for you on it. We've had a very clear webinar articulating the points and the benefits of Willpower, but please follow up with us after if you're interested. We've already got 50 partners and some key seed funders like the Rito Hall Foundation and the Toronto Foundation on board. But this campaign will be a social narrative story, talking to Canadians about remembering a charity in their will. Based on the Remember Charity campaign in the UK, a highly successful decade-long program based in giving data, and we're moving down that path as well. We're going to be telling that story, and when we hear donors in the focus grouping that has been done, they tell us, I can't give the charity because I want to take care of my kids. Single Canadians, highest level of givers, absolutely, but a lot of them say it's my heirs, and we need to let them know it's not an either or. As you may know from our courses, you can get 100%, you can use 100% of your tax credits against your income taxes in year of death and the previous return. We have that great opportunity. We keep on trying to tell it in the story of tax benefits when it's time to tell it with the story of heart. This campaign is going to be exciting. Please join us as we do this across the country. It will be, again, this large initiative, large broad-based marketing, not logos and egos, as our partner Imagine Canada likes to say we need to get rid of. They're a great partner on this as we work forward with them to advance philanthropy in this country. Last couple notes before we get to questions. We've given you some links here to help you if you're doing staff evaluation, especially right now as you've got many staff at home, to say how can we level up on our plan and major giving competency. We've literally made a roadmap, competency roadmap for charities and advisors and how it connects into our education, and we're happy even to plug you into external education as well. So small charities, ears up. I said to you, and many of you in that poll show said, it's part of my job, but not a full-time part of my work. And the rest of you said, it's a reactive program for us. If you do one thing, and again, we said those reactive, those panic wills, well, there was a small percentage that included bequests, but where did those lawyers go? They didn't call you up, they went for your website. If there is one plan giving thing you can do, it's make sure that bequests are clear and they can get it from your website when they run to their lawyer at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday when you shouldn't be in the office. We're releasing today a free and public resource on making sure bequests are well represented on your website. You'll get the link from us. I've just shared it online. We're excited to be sharing this free resource. But you know what? Your finance office, your leadership needs to go deeper. You as a fundraising team, you want the gift acceptance policies, the templates, the forms. That is all in our textbook, Plan Giving for Canadians. It is a 25-year textbook written by Dr. Frank Minton and Lorna Summers, which they have kindly gifted the intellectual property to CAGP. And now we manage this textbook. We partner with our wonderful colleagues at Miller Thomson to update it after every federal budget. We expand the strategy into, yes, burgeoning trends like cryptocurrency and farm properties, all in this textbook PDF resource, free with your CAGP membership, but you can also purchase it online, a great resource. We are holding our first ever online full day gift planning fundamentals. This is not a webinar. This is curriculum, full day education. We split it into a couple days to make it manageable through Zoom, but for the first time, we're going to do this online, and we're hoping to draw in and connect with charities in different parts of Canada we don't normally get to, like often urban centers or capitals. So we hope this is something you're interested in. We're doing it in a few weeks in June. We've lowered the price to make it more accessible. First time we're doing this. Really key for finance staff. If you have fundraising staff that are doing this, even board members or small organizations, we hope it's going to be of value to you. Remember, we want to represent that how. Strategy is super important. Can we do planned giving in a pandemic, in a crisis? You bet we can. And it's more important now than ever. I sit on the board of a couple small charities. We believe, if you believe in what you do, if you believe in mission, we're going to need the funds to continue that mission, to keep our doors open, to keep serving the people we care about. We need to double down. We hope that this has been a helpful webinar for you. Thanks to those of you who have shared questions. We want to say a special thanks because, as many of you know, we had to cancel our conference. For those of you who had to cancel gatherings, that was not an easy thing to do. It was the largest financial hit in our history, and we had people step up for us. We're calling them our CAGP 20 heroes. We're sharing that on our website, social, digital media. Many of our colleagues, you don't know who your friends are until times are tough. We had some great colleagues. Many of the people we mentioned today, our founders, our friends of CAGP, step forward to support us. We want to thank them. So for those of you who are on the call, who stuck with us, we are deeply grateful to you. For those of you that are engaging this education, we hope we can be of value. Let's have a bit of a discussion before we finish up today with questions. Great. Wonderful. A great couple questions here on follow-up about where people can find the competency list. Does CAGP send out some sort of a newsletter with updates on the tax updates, for example, things like this insurance update that just came out on the weekend? Absolutely, we do. You will see, heck, I'll give you a little preview here. All of the resources, I've got 5 pages of resources broken out into studies and books, podcasts, etc. And the CAGP ones are there. Competency framework, our courses, our webinars, etc. Plan Giving for Canadians, and yes, the free downloadable 1-page guide you can put to use today. Get on your website tomorrow. Can you follow, can CAGP send you all of that information? Absolutely. We do have a free e-newsletter where we can keep you up to date with that. We've put a subscription link both on Twitter right now and in our resources section. Just about at the end of time here. Great. A couple questions on the perspective from Jen Love, Amy Lindberger on surveying. I mentioned that concept of guided meditation on your organization, but you know what, again, we're really lucky that a lot of our sector leaders, legacy, marketing experts, strategy, even finance experts, write publicly. And so I've got an entire page for you of all those articles, blog posts, podcasts they have done on specifically planned giving in crisis. They've made them free and available. We have curated that for you today. That's a full page on the resource list.
Well, it's Erin here.
And thanks, Erin, for coming in to finish up.
Sorry, I have to cut in because we're gonna have to wrap this up. So I just want to remind everybody that if Paul wasn't able to get to your question, you are more than welcome to email him, or you might come up with questions later. As I mentioned earlier, you will be receiving an email from me this afternoon, which will include a link to the recording of this webinar, along with the link to a Dropbox folder with a copy of this presentation. The email will also include a link to a very short survey of today's webinar, so we'd really appreciate it if you could just complete it. It will only take a couple of moments, and we really value your feedback. Do join us for our next installment of our Webinar Wednesdays series on May 27th, when Chris Love will be presenting Administering Bequests and Puppy Training. And please keep an eye on our website and on our e-news to learn more about further online education we will be adding to the roster over the coming weeks. You can find more information and registration details on our website. And if you haven't signed up to receive our e-news and e-communications, you can subscribe at the bottom of the homepage on our website. If you have any questions about CAGP membership, the CAGP Foundation, our programs in education, or anything else CAGP related, please don't hesitate to contact me. Paul, thank you so much for presenting this very timely and important webinar for us today. We look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you. Stay safe and have a good rest of the week, everyone. Goodbye.